Well, hello everybody and welcome to the channel. Today it's another vinyl shootout with a Rhino Hi-Fi release coming out. It's Stevie Nicks Bella Donna. We're going to be comparing it to a US first pressing and a Japanese first pressing as well. That's coming up next on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. So Belladonna was released in 1981. It was actually recorded during the sessions where Fleetwood Mac was making the double LP Tusk. Now, some of the songs that were on this record were actually written by Stevie as far back as 1975, and some were done specifically for this record. Some of her key backing musicians had very limited time for the studio, so she really didn't make this quite as lavish in guitar work as she had wanted to, but got by as well as she could. And the outcome was really great, with a couple of duets with Don Henley and Tom Petty being highlights on the record. Now, in fact, when this record came out, it crawled up to number 2, and then it was a month later before it got up to number 1. And at that time, it was in fact selling 500,000 unit clip, and then it got to 1 million once it reached number 1. So a very, very successful record for Stevie Nicks. Now, in comparing this record, there are some tracks that really give you some very good nuance in areas that help you quite a bit to determine which of these pressings is better. And all I can say is, at a macro level, the original and Kevin Gray's Rhino Hi-Fi are the real competitors in this. The Japanese pressing, in fact, suffered from some lack of lower end, which was very prevalent on certain tracks with bass and kick drum thumps, and also had some high end or top end that was a little bit over the top. And that became even more apparent when you started to do the comparisons. And although I wouldn't quite use the word shrill, I will say that it got to a point where the accentuation of it and the lacking of the lower end was very distracting when doing the comparisons, and made it fall further down the ranking. So this is one of those times where the Japanese pressing was very much like the stereotypes of them, where they don't quite have the bottom end, and they seem to be very clean up on top, and maybe even just a bit too bright for some sets of ears. Of course, everyone has to pick what they want. But what's important about this release from Rhino is that it really does provide, obviously, a much quieter vinyl, and it does, in fact, give the pronouncements in the areas where you want it. And I think that's what we're looking for when we do these types of comparisons. One of the other really interesting things about the Japanese pressing is that the decibel level or volume level of some of the tracks varied compared to the OG and the Rhino. It was kind of weird, actually. I had to go back and do some double checks on that, but sure enough, it was a little out of position. It was stronger on some tracks than others. And for me, that was really disappointing and kind of a thing that really kind of throws things off balance. And when you're listening to it done in its original state and the way it was intended, it really is something that makes you want to turn the volume down in a few cases on the Japanese version, because it gets a bit out of hand. Now, that was something that I really rarely had a problem with, and when it comes to various songs, it usually is the entire title is either louder or softer than another. This one actually had variability within the tracks. So I'll go through some specifics as we look at the numbers. The nature of audio comparisons is that the results presented in this video are fully subjective. They are based on my equipment in my listening room using my hearing capability. Therefore, your results may be different. My effort here is to provide you the relative difference of audio characteristics across various pressings. So the good news about this album is it won't set you back much money no matter which way you go. I've seen U.S. first pressings that you can get for $15, maybe $20 if you want a really high VG Plus one. Japanese, though, it's about $30 or so to pick up one of those, which isn't that bad for a Japanese. And then, of course, the new Rhino Hi-Fi is at $40. Again, it's a limited to 5,000 produced. So I don't know what they're sold at, but for that matter, I'm sure they're still available on the Rhino site at the time of this filming. When we get to relative dB, as I said, the original and the Rhino are pretty close to each other across the board, but on the Japanese pressing, there are some variations. It seemed like the first few tracks, Belladonna and Kinda Woman, were cranked up a bit, and then from then on in side two, it wasn't at the same level, just a peculiarity that I noticed. But be that as it may, I did a volume match by song as I was going through this. Is it related to the quietness of the vinyl? The original was decent. The Specialty Records pressing one that I had, it was about an 8. Had some noise, some surface noise on it, which was inherent at that time in the vinyl world, so to speak. The Japanese one was definitely quieter. I wouldn't call it exactly dead quiet, but definitely quieter, getting a 9. And just even a tad quieter was the Rhino Hi-Fi. Very, very well done. Almost a 10. Had a couple of small areas where I got a bit of a pop or a tick, and I had cleaned it. So I gave it a 9.5, very solid. And now as we get into the actual sonics of it, the bass, mid, and treble, the bass and the mid were similar across the pressings within their own self. In other words, the bass and the mids got an 8.5 as it related to the US, and the Japanese got a 7 because, as I said, those particular areas where there were more bass inflections or kick drums, and I'm thinking specifically of How Still My Love and the ending track on the album, which was The Highwaymen, that had some very specific types of kicks, had very specific types of bass notes that were there, that were strong and accentuated. And then when you got to comparing them, it became even more obvious that they were lacking on the Japanese. So the bass and the mids there, because even some of the vocals were really more in the high end noticeable than in the mid, which took away from them. And that became, again, something very obvious. So we saw that the Japanese got 7s on the bass and the mids, whereas the OG got 8.5. And then even a notch up even more with that better bass condition with the Rhino Hi-Fi, got it to a 9.5. And the vocals were real silky smooth, and they were down in the mid-range area more, where it was even more on the OG, whereas that Japanese, again, it danced the voice on the upper end a bit more, which took away from your ability to actually hear it or enjoy it in the mid-range. And so when we look at the treble, we see there, an 8.5 on the original versus the Japanese is over the top. As I say at the bottom there, when it's accentuated too much, it's a negative, and it goes over the top, over the 10. Now, in this case, with my rating system, 10.5 doesn't make it better, it makes it worse. It reduces the value of that particular column. against the total because, in fact, it is overdoing it. Now, I wouldn't say that we had semblance there, but I definitely think that it was getting to where it was becoming beyond what one would want to hear. And it's not quite as noticeable or annoying on its own. But then when you go compare it to the other two, then you see, how well it's managed on the original. And then on the Rhino is even more well placed and more pleasing to the ear, giving you that fullness of what the high end sounds like without abusing it. So this is where those landed with the 8.5 for the original on treble and the Rhino with a 9.5, but then the Japanese pressing going over the top, too much, 10.5, which reduces its value actually with the way my calculations work. So that really kind of set in motion some of the dissatisfaction relative to that Japanese pressing. The dynamic range on the original was very good and much better than the Japanese pressing because, again, it wasn't reaching down and it was going up top very high, but it really didn't give you the full range like the Rhino did. The Rhino definitely gave you, as I gave it a 9.5, you were getting it at all levels of the spectrum and a good wide berth of dynamic range. And similar, the soundstage and the imaging was even a little better on the OG than the other ratings it had gotten. It got a 9 on this one. But, again, the Japanese did not have it because it was felt more compressed and felt more stayed in its area and not really broadening beyond the horizon of the actual physical speaker in its location. Whereas the Rhino opened all of that up and brought out some imaging and fullness, especially in some of the voices that Stevie has and her male counterparts and the strengths that they had, which again, as we go into the voices, similar numbers, 9 on the original, 7 on the Japanese, and 9.5 on the Rhino, really giving a nice, sweet emphasis to the voices, placing it where it belonged, more in the mid-range, and giving you that satisfying feel of what this record really is all about. So in the end, when we get to the Sonics averages, we've got an 8.67, which is pretty respectable for the OG, but the Japanese 7.23, some disappointments there as we've mentioned, but the 9.5 average across the board then for the Rhino, very solid, very well done. And when we bring in the vinyl, the OG goes down a tad because it's a little noisier, and it was 8.57, whereas the Japanese goes up a hair because it was quieter, 7.48. But when you look at these, an original's really cheap, and if this is just a so-so album to you in terms of interest and care, that $1.73 cost per rating point is a good value. And although the Japanese shows the 415 per rating point, I would tell you that the annoyance levels of those high ends, unless you really like it sharp and high on top and lacking in bass, that $4.21 for the Rhino is a much better investment of cost per rating point. And so that's how these three fared. Now, I know I'll get questions, where's the MoFi version? Where is the VMP? I didn't have those available to me to do any kind of analysis for this shootout. I can only do what I have or what I'm given access to. So as I've always said, when I get folks who are engaged with the channel and want to send me one or volunteer it in advance, sometimes those come in. We're going to see that on an upcoming Royal Scam shootout with the AP coming out now, and you'll see a couple of versions that I have that were loaned to me. So for now, these are the three that I had to compare. So there you have it. Those are the numbers, and it shows clearly that the Rhino High Fidelity certainly is solid. The OG is no slouch in and of itself, but there just are areas where, in fact, you can feel a much richer sound out of the Rhino. And things just seem to come together to where things are very balanced. And that's across all the tracks. And this LP does have some variations in the type of songs that it has. But what really was impressive to me was that it was well tamed with the songs that had really strong drum beats and kick drums, where you really could feel that, and the bass in a couple of songs also was grabbing to the point of where it stood out, and it was in fact a feeling that you could get immediately as soon as the chord or note was struck or the kick was performed. On the original, they were there, but things seemed a little more crowded and things were more segregated and dynamic in the Rhino Hi-Fi. And when I watched on my meters on my amplifier, you could see where it was kicking into another realm of the decibel level and the impact level on the amplifier, which told me that in fact, because those two had pretty much a dead nuts decibel level across the board, then the impact, in fact, and the dynamics of the Rhino was just a bit stronger. Newer equipment possibly, or just a little more TLC by Kevin, whatever it was just a bit richer. These are only $40 plus shipping, of course. And, you know, they really are, in fact, well done, well pressed, flat as a pancake, quiet vinyl, all the attributes you want without that higher price tag sometimes you get in audiophile records. And when you put it all together, if this is an album that you like, you will enjoy this pressing and you will enjoy the sound that you get in terms of the value of the record. You don't need to go hunting one down. You can just order it from Rhino online while they're available. Again, 5,000 limit on these. And I would tell you that it's a good investment and you're going to enjoy it. So as always, thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so by clicking on the bell and the all option. And a thumbs up or like is appreciated for the algorithm. Your comments are always welcome. I love to see those because they really give me interactivity with the community. So until we catch you next time on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion, take care, everybody.